Hello, hello. So here I am on the Good Enough Mum page, and today what I'm going to talk about is being imperfectly perfect, or being perfectly imperfect, whichever way you want to see it, but basically to accept our imperfections as they are. And if you think about it, if we look at nature, there's rarely anything really perfect in nature. There's always some sort of tiny flaw. And I think that can be our inspiration. There's rarely anything that's completely perfect. And we do put pressure on ourselves to be perfect, don't we? And I think this is often why we struggle so much to feel that we're good enough, because we're setting such high standards for ourselves. We, as mums, want to be the best mum that we can be. And quite often that means that we think we've got to be perfect. And so, what I wanted to run through today was just some thoughts about making mistakes and what to do when you've made a mistake. And I think the first thing to do is actually to be honest with yourself and admit that it's a mistake, and to have a bit of humility about it, because it can be so difficult when we haven't got a particularly good feeling about ourselves, to actually admit to ourselves that perhaps we have made a mistake. And what we can want to do is find others at fault. And actual fact, quite often it's us that's at fault. And we need to just admit that to ourselves, and be a bit humble about it. And it's actually a bit of a relief when we can do that. We don't need to be defensive. We can just say, yeah, I've made a mistake. And to be quite simple with it, and to say, and this is what the mistake was. And within making a mistake, quite often the reason why we want to avoid taking responsibility for it, I think, is because it's actually very hurtful to us to admit that we've made a mistake. It's if we are wanting to be perfect, it feels like it's a cost to us to admit that we've actually made a mistake, because what does that say about us? And it's really important to acknowledge when that happens, that we've actually lost something here. There's a mistake's been made. You can't get over it. Something's gone wrong, and there's something that we might have lost as a result of that. And it's about just recognizing that that's the nature of life, and letting go, and just accepting that that's part of the sadness of life, and that also. We aren't perfect, and therefore, it's time to just forgive ourselves for that. And I read this really good quote in the last week, and I thought I would like to share it with you. And it's about forgiveness. And it says forgiveness is really coming to terms with the fact that you can't change the past. And I really think that's so helpful to think about that. To think actually, the reason I'm getting cross with either myself or someone else is I want the past to be different. It's gone. We can't change it. And I think that's partly about acknowledging the sadness of what's happened. Um, but if we hold on to that blame, and a self-blame or blame of others, it means that we can't move on. We can't actually make a difference to the future. And so it's really important for us to sort of let go, to just sort of accept that that is the past. And in that letting go, we get to the point. Hi Emma, nice to see you. We get to that point where we can think to ourselves, if we're prepared to accept that the past is gone, that leaves us open to the fact that the future is in front of us. And that means that this is actually not the end of everything. There's still more future, and we can work away at the future, and we can make a difference. And so if we accept that those are the mistakes that we've made, we can actually begin to do something about them. We can choose to try and make amends if that's possible. We can decide that we're going to be different in the future if we need to be. We can think, what do I need to do? And so sort of embracing the fact that we've made a mistake is actually something that we can learn from. And that means that in the future we could actually be different. And so there's a hopefulness about that, which I think is quite encouraging to us. And then finally, just what I wanted to say was about sort of accepting ourselves as we are, because when we make mistakes, it's so easy to allow that mistake to define us. So, for example, thinking about it in terms of being a mum, we might say, shout at the children. And then that makes us think, oh, I'm a really bad mum because I shout at the children. And we're making everything that is about us about that incident where we shouted at them. And we don't look at all the other ways in which we do other things, and that is not the whole of us. It's only a part of us. And we forget that. We identify that really awful stuff that we don't like about ourselves, and we make that everything about us, when in actual fact it's just one small part of us. And so part of being perfectly imperfect is actually about letting go of that perfection, of having to be perfect across the board. It's about allowing ourselves to be imperfect. And there's lots of areas where we can be pretty good. We might not be perfect, but we're pretty good. But there's those areas where perhaps we do fail and we are not so perfect. But don't make that everything. Make ourselves more than that particular thing that we did wrong. And so there's a few tips just to be perfectly imperfect. And it helps us if we can accept that we're imperfect. It really brings a freedom to it. It brings a freedom to us in who we are as people, and it brings a freedom to our parenting. So I hope that's helpful to you. And I'm planning to do a blog shortly about perfectionism. So I'm going to bring that out. May not be next week, it might be the week after, but keep an eye out for it and you'll see it. And of course, as ever, if you're local and you want to have some counselling around this sort of issue, you can contact me via the Facebook page. I'd be very happy to hear from you. And thanks, Emma, for joining me. Bye for now.